Well, that it is interesting, and as it related to our future and moving out to Wellington, is that the the seats really were as inexpensive as you could basically get, and I was like, opera season tickets. I was like, I mean, you got a baseball season ticket, you got 81 games, but the opera season tickets was 5 operas. And tickets were like $40 each, so like the whole commitment for 2 people was like $400. And so, but for like $5 more, you could get a box seat. The problem was it was nosebleeds up high, but we still thought they were like the coolest seats ever because you had a chair that moved and it was on the side. And at the end of the day, it's the opera. You can't, whether you can see or not, it's not even in English. So, so the lady said to us, "Are these your grandmother's tickets?" And it was like, oh my gosh, how many generations are we away? But it turned out her name was Ruth Blecker, and she knew the people that had the tickets before us. And we might have matched up with the ages of a real person's grandchildren,
right.
Not just that every person, wherever you sit, is going to say that to you. That was a feasible thing, which what Ruth didn't know is that those people had given up the seats, and that's how we got them, because they were new seats that we were able to get. But turns out we ended up making friends with her.
Right,
and
we didn't
keeping
know
friends
then.
with her for a decade or so.
We didn't know then that she lived in Wellington and was a member of our temple. And we saw her at temple at one point, and that's when our friendship outside of the opera really started.
Well, the interesting thing is we lived in City Place at the time.
Oh,
and that wasn't even our temple.
Yeah, you're right.
So this is just a woman that happened to live out in Wellington that we would then meet with someday when we moved out to Wellington and joined our temple, which is still our current temple, Temple Beltora. And then, her family was pretty influential in the temple. They donated a lot of money, and there was like the Blecker wing and the Blecker this. And I was like, do you think that's that same Blecker? And they kept saying it. I was like, that's that lady up front. That's that Laura from the opera. So it turned out,
At that point, we started calling her our opera buddy.
Yeah.
And I think we
had
had
children.
We had Sarah, so I would go visit her with Sarah. And then when we had Lila, I would take both girls, and we would bring her Hamantashen during Purim, and we'd visit other times of the year. And Sarah still remembers going to visit.
Yep. And she lived into her 90s, and I became friends with her grandson. We did like one of the Purim spiels, and he seemed to be a really nice young man. He had the same last name, and still a very good family. And you never know who you're going to meet in nonprofits, sitting next to you at the opera, or anywhere. And so that was an interesting one. That was just you forgot that we weren't at the same temple. We thought we'd never see that lady again, but we did have seats with her for 4 years.
Right.
And she would like offer candy, and I would
she always had candies.
Take the candy and dust it off and eat it, and I like candy, but not like sugar-free candy and stuff. It was like as bad a candy as could be, but it meant a lot to her to give it away, and it reminded me of when my grandmother would give me similar kind of candy as a kid, for sure. It's just old lady candy. You don't even have that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do remember that we also at some point became involved with the Palm Beach Symphony, and then I don't know if that was because of your friend, or was it actually because of you saw the champagne reception once.
Okay, so you're confusing 2 different great nonprofit Young Friends groups. So when we were still back to the Ruth Blecker days of the opera and thinking we were cool in our $40 seats, which as we got more involved, our seat prices went up and up and up to like $200 a ticket eventually. But luckily, my success in business could afford those eventually. And that was the price range of the commitment I wanted to make. But by the way, I do actually still like opera. But in the middle, when we would go out for the thing, there was a group of people, and they were all drinking champagne. I was like, whatever that is, we need to join that. And so we got involved simply to drink champagne at the intermissions. And it turned out that they had a Young Friends group, the Young Friends of the Opera, which we did get involved with. And it did some strategic planning with my business and the opera and the donors of the opera. Put on some receptions, and then we were the Young Friends chair for their annual gala. That happened to be at Mar-a-Lago before Trump became president and became unfashionable to have nonprofits there. But the opera no longer is at Mar-a-Lago, but at this point it was, and so we were the Young Friends chair at the Mar-a-Lago gala, black tie, which was really nice. And then what happened was a friend of mine through Michael, my brother's country club, became the CEO of the Palm Beach Symphony. And I was friends with him through Bear Lakes Country Club, and then we were on LinkedIn together. I got a pop-up that Dave McClymon became the CEO of Palm Beach Symphony, and I said, there's a Palm Beach Symphony? I had never heard of it, even though it had been around 40 years, now 50 years. They're just having their 50th season this year. And so I reached out to Dave, and he tells the story a lot. I've heard him tell it many times to groups. And we went to lunch, and he said, we want to do a Young Friends group. And I said, oh, that's great. I'm involved with the Young Friends of the Opera. We got a little more involved than just drinking champagne. It was difficult to get young people interested in the opera. But he's like, I was like, yeah, would you be on? I was like, yeah, I'll help you. I'll be on that committee. And he said, I want you to chair the committee. So I was like, you know what, something new? Why not? I had the time available. It was an opening in my, availability of, how much I wanted to commit to time-wise to philanthropy at the time. And it was a point when it was a big time. And so I did that. And we also made a bunch of great friends through the Palm Beach Symphony and did some stuff. And I involved my business and clients in it. Same thing that I did with the Moth Jupiter Theater and bringing client events and bringing the nonprofits to the for-profit, personal business, which, clients love that stuff. And so it's something where I was able to entertain my clients and kill two birds with one stone, make them happy. They're happy we're involved, that we're giving back to the community. We're not just all about take, and trying to just make money. We're trying to make the world a better place. And, that helps them want to send their friends to us and, helps us win a lot of ties in the real for-profit business world. But the symphony was great, and to this day, that Young Friends group is among the best Young Friends group of all of them. They get 100, 150 people per event. When I started it, I pulled a few strings with friends and begged and got all of my friends to be on the committee, and there's about 4 other people, maybe 12 of my friends and 16 of us, and we had about 20 people per event. But it's gotten so good, and my friend David's really turned that whole organization around and quadrupled things, and just to really move, to see that one person's work can really make such a big difference in a nonprofit. Seeing that there, seeing it with other ones, seeing it with my friend Andrew at the mall, it's that these nonprofits, they're real businesses, and one good person can really help it. One bad person can literally ruin it. I mean, it can literally make it shut down and go out of business. Like, there's no profits just because they don't have to pay taxes to nonprofits, but there's no revenues and there's no profits and there's no funding, then they have no point to shut it down. So one of the things when I'm up fundraising with the Boys and Girls Club, I would literally be like, do you want to turn kids away? If you want to turn kids away, then don't raise your hand. But if you don't want to turn kids away, you need to kind of step up. This is what we need money for. Like your donation today keeps us from telling them, no, you can't come here. Go be on the streets. So I've got a lot of things that have been rewarding in my life, in my career, in my marriage as a parent. And, I think that the nonprofit was something that was a big part of us before we had children.
Right.
Before we had our own family, and we didn't have animals or pets or anything. And so it was a way to have that feeling of rewarding that I also now say I would get from the most rewarding job I ever had, which is being a parent.
Yeah. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that. We could talk about how we really tried hard for Sarah. It took us a long time to get her. And we always knew we wanted 2.
Yeah, sometimes, you may get to the point in a courtship where you can kind of agree on these things, and maybe you have the time in advance to kind of negotiate or pre-arrange or pre-discuss these things.
Yeah.
I recommend it in choosing a mate that you know these things. But we had kind of said we will have 2 children, and if we have problems having children, then we will adopt children. And if we get to 2 children, and that works out that well, and we're on track for what our plans are, we will then decide on whether we want to have more children. And so, yeah, unfortunately, just because you want children, you still have to go through some things through getting pregnant and having them. And, so it's not that it was, it's just, there's a reason for everything. Everything happens for a reason. And, this just took some time, but it didn't take like 10 years.
Right.
Our story only goes 20 years back. So it took it a couple extra years, and there's some emotional toll there. But we got Sarah. We were, very happily parents. I was pretty much scared to death over, the pregnancy part of it, and just hoping that everything would be fine, and crossing my fingers. And luckily, everything did work out, and we got blessed with first one healthy child, and then 2 healthy children, and both girls. And I had 2 older sisters, and I would have been happy with boys, happy with girls. But you ask me now if I had to pick it, I would definitely pick 2 girls, because that's just nothing makes my heart heavier and happier than thinking about my 2 girls and really being the man of the house. If there was some boy, then there's a chance that he'd be smarter than me or better than me. And at least now, there's no one worse than me in the house or better than me. Even when we just had a dog, I wanted to make sure that it was not going to be a male dog. But yes, I'm the best and worst, so I break even at a tie. So, but yeah, children are a thing that really changed, and it became a point of pulling back a little bit before my cancer diagnosis of like,
Right.
am I trying to help these other kids and miss my own kids' event, and I'm going to miss my own daughter's dance recital to go help other kids I don't know? Yes, in some cases, and no in others. And do I need to be out, at night when I got my own children to worry about? And then, so it became a point where things shifted, and it's all about so much time in life and how you allocate it. Mm-hmm. And of course, then these last 5.5 years, I just the philanthropy really took a big back seat. Right. Luckily, I've had these auctioneering opportunities, which is a great way to give back, and I can still work into my schedule, and that's why I do go out of my way to try and not miss those if possible. But did you have some more thoughts on the children?
I think pretty good on the children, and we can talk more about them.
That's why we're making this video.
Right. we could talk more about some of the things that that we remember about them, some of our favorite memories that we've had to date.
Oh, yes.
And I think that they would probably enjoy hearing some of those. So,
well, yeah, there's a good one with Lila where I kept getting these pop-ups from Apple that she was spending money on my Apple account through a game called Roblox that she likes to play. And, normally I would delete them, but like it kept being like $50, $25. It turned out to be quite a bit of money. And so it was just funny because you took a video of it. We have a video of it, but brought her to the bedroom to be like, "What's going on, Lila?" And she was, for the first time in her life, caught red-handed. She had spent like $250 of our money without ever asking us whether she could buy these Roblox. And she was so sweet about it. And she was like, "I'm sorry." And she got the cutest voice. But it turned out, where I had with Sarah, I'd given Sarah like a weekly allowance or a monthly allowance, and I bought her a package where she got $20 a month and she got discounts, and I monitored it better. But Lila never did that because Lila was too young. And so in talking to her and discussing it with her, I realized that I kind of gave her the string, and I was pretty loose in the way I allowed her to do it, and I kind of got her into the problem. And it was in discussing it with her, and as sweet as she was, I realized it was my fault. But I didn't want to, reward her for what really does seem like spending money without my approval. But I made the executive decision in the same discussion, which we do have on video. It's quite funny, to actually give her $50 and sign her up for the monthly account.
Which was so shocking to me, silently videoing.
Yeah.
Like, how is this
her biggest trouble she ever got into? It's definitely a memorable moment. I was able to kind of right the wrong and said it. And you know what? She never went over her amount. She never spent money without asking again. And that's definitely a funny story with Lila that I want to watch that video later. It's too funny. We bring it up a lot. There's been a lot of stories with Sarah, but there was one when we first moved into the house where we were playing ball, and
we had like that it was like a little Tykes little girl softball tee with a little bat.
It was like with a wiffle ball.
Yes.
Yeah. It was
and
like a
she
wiffle
kept
ball
trying
bat.
to hit it and couldn't even make contact, so you went over to show her.
Yeah, it was something where I was hitting and she was pitching.
So then you stayed there. No, not even pitching. So the ball was on the tee.
Uh-huh.
I was out in like the outfield with her,
Okay. Oh, and so I was hitting her pop-ups. I was trying to hit the ball to her,
and she would just go
and
run
we
and
had
get them.
we had the video of it, and this one, and we somehow went on to slow motion,
Accidentally, I didn't even
and
know
the
slow-mo
ball was
was a thing.
going, and then boop, it hit her on the head.
And she was too
And then,
young to know to like catch it
but
or
luckily it was a
anything.
wiffle ball. But that's a great video that we have of her.
Yeah.
That's really funny because as soon as the ball hits her, it stops out of slow motion.
Well, that's
It goes
because
back to real time.
I quickly put the phone down and like ran over to check on her. So I
Okay.
think it just like.
But it
at the
looks
end,
pretty bad. But yeah,
she was fine.
that could be on that TV show where they do
America's Funniest
the
Home
America's
Videos.
Funniest Home Videos.
Yeah, so we definitely have lots of great movies, and I'm gonna look through them and just.
Oh, through our 120,000 photos we have, and
It's just so hard to
13,000
delete photos.
videos.
Like there's so many of
We've
them.
grown up in a different world than when we were kids, when you had like
Yeah.
printed pictures, which your mother still brings us over, the printed pictures.
And we appreciate, well, not the actual pictures, but Grandma will make up like a little plaque, and then we'll put that out. But yeah, the actual picture we do nothing with at this point.
Yeah, no, maybe throw away, and it's no different than the 130,000 files we had that we really can't look through. But fortunately, they're segregated and
Yeah.
they're in size and location and date, and so it's fun to look through old pictures for sure.
Yeah. So Lila and Sarah always laugh when I end up talking about the olden days. But the olden days are really just like us 20 years ago.
Right, not the 20s.
And this just brought up a memory of mine when we first started dating. And I was at South Grade as a music teacher. You were, at your company at Morgan Stanley, I guess, at that time. And I worked hard to get a computer that had internet for myself as a music teacher. And you would start sending me like, emails on like Thursdays and Fridays with like confirmations from Priceline for all different hotels. And it could be anywhere in the state of Florida. It would usually be like a 2 to 3 hour drive, or down to Miami for an hour. And so in the beginning of our relationship, we would travel everywhere in the state of Florida on a whim. And I remember crossing the state, going to Naples with you, and early on, and we had cell phones at that time, but we talked about how there was like no reception in the middle of Alligator Alley at that time. And we would actually always talk about how much we love Google and being able to search things up now and look things up, which for us was only like 10 years old at that point. And I remember thinking like, oh, it'll be so amazing. Like, I wish that we could like look things up on our phones, on our cell phones, and like be able to like have these ideas and look them up while we're in the car. And so like just thinking back on how different things were when we first got together, there wasn't even Google on the cell phones at that point to like look up websites.
Right. Well, even that story, the reason I was emailing you is because I wasn't texting you. Like that's like before texting, because I would have just texted you. This is where we're going, and maybe there were text messages. I think you had to kind of do the 3 letters.
3 different
to do
letters,
it.
like punch it.
Yeah, but there was no smartphone at the time.
Right.
But yeah, technology has evolved. I know our children are like, what kind of smartphone did you have when you were a kid? We didn't have them, and they don't know about home phones. They don't know how to talk on phones. But thank God, technology is something I've always embraced. I've always known that this is going to be really cool someday, and we're right at that point of self-driving cars now. It's
actually happened.
If this video is watched, in 20 years from now, people will laugh that we're talking about it. But
we don't have one yet, and the idea of being in one still is scary.
Lila's 9, and so normally you get your driver's license at 16. So
and she's saying she does not want to drive.
We're right at the 7-year period where you may not need to drive. We're really right there. The cars are just there, but just like we had to text each other. But yeah, technology is something that is really great. It's always just going to get better and better and better. And we've embraced it. But we actually used to write down what we would Google when we got home.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't look it up in the car.
We drive around Googling things. We predicted that maybe someday that would happen, but we weren't that confident it was going to happen because we would have invented it. But we were just like hopeful that it would happen. Self-driving cars really are coming.
Yes, they are here. Let's talk about talking about cars. Why don't we talk about some of your car history? Every time we're in the car together, I would say, and we're on a long drive, at least one of your first car stories comes out. And so I want the girls to definitely know some of these early car stories. Yeah,
that's a nice segue. raise our children differently, and just because your parents raised you one way, or not yours, but a person's parents raised them, unfortunately, across the globe, people are repeat things. The way they were raised is the way that their parents raised them, and then this is the breaking the cycle, and sometimes in a negative way. But with us, there's some ways that my parents raised me that I don't necessarily want to raise the kids the same way, but not necessarily from a they did anything wrong. They did their best and they raised us to the best of their ability. But when it came to wanting to teach work ethic, I think my parents did a good job. Did they put me in harm's way in teaching me such good work ethic? Yes. Will I do the same thing with my daughters? And let me explain. So for us, like when we were kids, if we wanted something, we had to earn the money to get it. And so I started a door-to-door light bulb business when I was 12 years old, because at 12 years old, you couldn't have a regular job. You had to wait till 14 to get a regular job. And so I met a friend in school, in middle school, and his dad had a connection to these light bulbs. And so I could go door to door. He made my own briefcase, and I was going door to door, and I was undercutting the Home Depots of the world back then. And it was a way to make money. And I was using that money to buy things I wanted, because they would give us limited things, but anything we really wanted, we had to earn. And that was tough at the 12 and those ages. But as soon as I turned 14, I got my first job at Burger King, and and had all these different jobs just to earn money. Meanwhile, it was teaching me things like work ethic and seeing how small businesses operated, learning how they employed people, what people did, roles, assembly lines, how these businesses operated, technology, running the cash registers and the drive-through. I had the headset. And I did basically every job possible within 2 months of that Burger King job. I learned pretty quickly I didn't really want to get into that Burger King job. But when it came to cars, our parents said, "You want a car? Make enough money to buy a car." Well, with going to school and with minimum wage being $4.25 an hour, it's not that easy. With a job of 15 hours a week, making $50 a week, to be able to buy a very expensive car.
Didn't you start with a scooter?
I did have a scooter, which it is much cheaper to get to that goal. The scooter only cost $600, so probably why we did start with a scooter. But when it did come to my first car, it was a $4,000 car. And in this case, I didn't, at $4 an hour in these jobs, I didn't have enough money to pay for the car, but I did have enough money to pay off the car over time. So my parents were nice enough to lend me the money for the car that wasn't very valuable. That also, because it was an inexpensive car, had a lot of problems with it mechanically, where I would just be stranded on the side of the road, which is why I say with our daughters, I might make them pay for, through jobs and through their money, some part of the car. Maybe they pay for $4,000 of the car and we pay the other $26,000, so that at least they're in a safe car. There were times where I hydroplaned off the road because my tires were so bald because I didn't have the money to buy new tires. Of course, I didn't tell them. That it put me in a pretty dangerous position. Luckily, I'm here and I made it and learned that if you want something in life, you really need to earn it. And so I really respect that. But I had some bad luck with these cars. I had two that the engines blew up. Like the last day I ever rode them was the last day they ever rode, meaning they went negative value. So I'll explain. The car was worth $2,000 that I paid for $4,000 that I probably paid $3,000 to fix up over the time just to maintain it. And on the day that the engine blew, the engine cost $4,000 to be fixed. So the $2,000 car would have cost $4,000 to fix. So what do? You got a car that can't move. Fortunately, you can sell it to the junkyard, and the junkyard will come out and they will tow your car away for you and give you $50. So that only happened to me once. That happened to me twice. So I sold two cars, all the money I had into them, all the money, to essentially in the end have $50 and have that inability to, what am I going to do with the car that doesn't run, moved. I think one might have actually been moved from the mechanic that said it was $4,000 to fix. So Yeah, so those are my stories with cars. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about cars, fixing up, how to jump a car, how to change a tire battery, how to change a tire, how to put water in and radiators and batteries in cars, things that I'm sure our daughters will never do. They may not even drive, let alone change a flat tire. Nowadays, it's all in another language anyways, probably, and, you just call a phone number and they come and fix it, or they call us to do it. But had a lot of fun with those. I remember there was a time where my window didn't work on my car, so I would go for drive-through windows, and I would have to, go get fast food. I'd put my seat all the way back and go back through the second window. And these are, they don't even know what I'm doing when I'm going like that, but these are non-digital windows, roll-up windows. And I'd have to get my food and pay through the back seat, through the window. And I always got a lot of laughter from the drive-through people, which I had been a drive-through person, so I kind of knew what that was like, and probably had seen people do that. There was one time where my door didn't open, so the only way to open my door was to roll my window down to open the door from the outside.
Oh my gosh!
So like these things, they teach you. You got to remember where you came from, and so now I might drive a $90,000 car, but nobody gave me that car, and I worked every. I was given a free college education by my parents. I was spoiled with love and food and things like that, and a good place to live and comfort. But working there makes me appreciate every day I drive around in my more expensive, safer car nowadays, knowing that they gave me the tools that enable me to have success in a career where I can then buy a car and appreciate it versus just, I don't know what it'd be like if someone just bought me that nice car. When I went to high school, I did have friends where they turned 16, they got a $40,000 car, BMW, for their birthday. In fact, one of those buddies ended up lending me that car to drive my prom date to prom, rather than pick her up in my $4,000 Hyundai Excel. I borrowed the BMW just to take her in a nice car, and it mattered one way or the other. But I was like, "You got that BMW? You know, have a date? Let me get that car tonight." So I did remember doing that at one point.
Wow, always good. Always fun to hear those stories. I have been driving you after some of your medical procedures, and I know that while I'm driving you in your car sometimes, you are constantly trying to improve my driving skills. And so one of the things that I always hear you saying in the back of my mind when I'm driving, you're always talking about this IPTI process.
Okay.
I didn't grow up with IPTI, but now I think about it, so I'm thinking we should probably put it on this video.
Well, we, the easiest way to get a driver's license growing up when I grew up in South Florida here was to take driver's ed. It's also a fun class because you had simulators, which no one would even know what that means, but they would be like a video game with simulations of driving, very rudimentary in, I guess, 1990. Yeah. As far as the things, but it was video games that were coming out. Video games really started in 1985, so it was cool. You had a gas and you had a brake, and you would actually get on these simulators, which was a lot of fun. It was like free video games. But the teacher, he was a pretty interesting guy, and that was a class that was just at the public high school. And I just always remembered, sometimes you remember where you learned this, where you learned that, when you learned this. It was the IPTI process, the IPDE process. And basically you are always, when you're driving, you are identifying, you are predicting, and you're deciding how to execute. So, it's something that, I learned, and even today, when you're driving and you're focusing on driving, you're always identifying and looking at the landscape of how you're driving, and is there anything going on? Is there something? Did a 2x4 just fall out of the car in front of you? Okay, I did. Okay, I've identified that. Now I want to predict. Okay, well, I have time to get to the right and miss it. I'm going to run it over. All right. Well, now I've identified. I've predicted. And now I need to make my decision quickly. This is all like in a split second, and then execute. And so we actually had this happen the other day. There was a car near us, but you identified, you predicted, and we moved over to the left, and we avoided some thing that fell off a car that wasn't wrapped onto going on I-95. Luckily, no one was hurt. But yeah, the IPTI process is good. And, you know, I think there's probably other acronyms and other ways through life of looking at things. But I think that, you know, can I teach the girls how to drive in advance on this video? Well, we've been together 20 years and I haven't taught you to drive. Although in the last month, you've been driving me around because of some different medicines I'm on. Don't allow me to drive currently. Although I'm going to be going off those medicines soon just to get away from having you drive me around all the time, just because I'm so scared. But no, you're a very good driver. But there's offensive driving and there's defensive driving. And I just feel like maybe because you didn't take the driver's ed course that I took, that taught the IPTI process, you drove, or maybe who taught you, your father, on your drive arounds, that he might have been too defensive of a driver. And maybe that's because his father, who maybe learned to drive in the 1930s, might have had to be more defensive. But here we are nowadays. We have cars, we have signals, we have things that can allow us to be less defensive. And what's the opposite of defense is offense. And so, you know, I see people that are driving all the time. I'm driving with them, and I say, man, I don't know who taught them to drive, but they definitely are driving too defensive. And so one thing I think that I have pushed on you in this last couple of weeks is to be less defensive, more offensive. And I think you're definitely becoming more of that, and meaning more offensive and less defensive. Is it enough? We shall see. What if after all this you get in an accident now that I'm teaching you to be more offensive? But I do think that there's a good mix of offensive and defensive. You can't be completely on the offense, honking around, driving like you on the road.
Right.
But you also can't, you know, you do matter, and you're not just a little old lady, and, you know, you have a car, and people are not just going to drive into you. The amount of love that we have for those children and for each other. I love you.